It is really my pleasure on behalf of Maine Farmland Trust and Land for Good to welcome you all to the 4th annual Maine Farmland Access and Transfer Conference. All right, shout out from that table. Nice. Thanks. I'm Erica Buswell, and I'm the Vice President of Programs at Maine Farmland Trust, and we are really honored to be co-hosting this year's conference with our colleagues, Land for Good. So at Maine Farmland Trust, our mission is to protect farmland, support farmers, and advance the future of farming in Maine. And us and Land for Good have been longtime collaborators around these issues of farmland access and transfer. So I just also want to give a shout out to their mission. They are a regional organization serving all 6 New England states to ensure the future of farming in New England by putting more farmers on the land more securely. So we're really excited about the content that we have on offer this year, and we've worked really hard to try and strike a balance between sort of humanizing these experiences of farmland access and transfer, while also providing you with some practical tools and information to help enable those processes to happen. We received an unprecedented 23 requests for proposals for our breakout sessions, which I think is a really positive indication that this topic is very timely and important in the agricultural community, and it was really hard to make decisions about which content to be able to offer today. So sort of like along these lines, in recognition of where we're at with farmland access and transfer conversations in the state, I'd love to ask for a show of hands of any farmland owners who would consider themselves to be retiring farmers or farmland owners that are looking to pass their land on to the next generation. Anyone willing? All right. Thank you so much for being here. You guys are very important at this moment in time, and the fact that you are here, I think, is a testament to your great leadership, because the future of a lot of the farms in Maine sort of rests in your hands and will be affected by the decisions that you make for the future of your land. So thank you so much for being that leader, and hopefully bringing all of your peers along in engaging with these processes as well. So in a moment, I'm going to turn the mic over to Jim Hafner, the Executive Director at Land for Good, and he is going to set the stage for our opening session and introduce our all-star cast of storytellers. But first, I did want to do the thank you to all of our amazing sponsors who truly made this conference possible. Many of them have set up today at these exhibitor booths, so I want to encourage everybody to take some time during the breaks and the meals to visit with them, because they're excited to be here and share with you about their work. So our major sponsor is American Farmland Trust. They're a national organization with a mission to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. And they've traveled all the way from Massachusetts and Connecticut to be here today. Our contributing sponsors are the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, the State of Maine Support Center for our many land-based natural resource interests, and the Maine Harvest Credit Union, which is working to create a specialized credit union focused on the small farms and new food economy of Maine. Our supporting sponsors include the Conservation Law Foundation's Legal Food Hub, which connects eligible farmers, food entrepreneurs, and the organizations that support them with attorneys from their growing network of legal attorneys who will assist you with your legal issues for free. The Cooperative Development Institute is also a supporting sponsor. They have a mission to work with people in the Northeast to create cooperative businesses and networks to grow a prosperous economy. Cultivating Community is also here, which grows sustainable communities by expanding access to healthy local food, empowering children, youth, and adults to play diverse roles in restoring the local sustainable food system, and modeling, teaching, and advocating for ecological food production. Food Solutions New England is a regional collaborative network organized to support the emergence and continued viability of a New England food system that is a resilient driver of healthy food for all, racial equity, sustainable farming and fishing, and thriving communities. The Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association is a broad-based community that educates about and advocates for organic agriculture, illuminating its interdependence with a healthy environment, local food production, and thriving communities. And Paris Farmers Union is also a sponsor, although I'm not sure that they're going to be here today to table. And they are your farm, home, and garden center since 1919. So thank you also to USDA Farm Service Agency and Natural Resource Conservation Service for also joining us today as exhibitors. So lastly, I'd just like to take another moment to help you all orient to today's agenda. So we built in some snack and stretch breaks for you throughout the day. Again, we want to encourage you to use that time to interact with our exhibitors and sponsors. Some of the sessions that we planned were incredibly popular, and the number of folks who pre-registered for them exceeded the classroom size that we have down the hallway. So a number of sessions are going to take place in here, which might get a little noisy because lunch will be getting set out here and snacks will be rotating through, and our exhibitors are also in here. So I just ask you guys to be mindful if there is a session happening in this space, you are still welcome to use it as your interaction space. Just note that there is some learning that's also trying to happen in this space at that time as well. On the flip side, during our breakout sessions, there will also be a couple of classrooms that are empty, so you are welcome to use those as places to have personal meetings or catch up with people or just find a quiet space if you need it. We're not going to hold you to sticking with the sessions that you pre-registered for, so please feel free to pick and choose whatever session speaks to you today as you decide how you want to spend your time. You'll note on the agenda that during the lunch hour, we're planning to have use that time as also time to talk with you. So Ellen Griswold and Abby Farnham from Maine Farmland Trust will be here to share an overview of the 2018-2019 Assessment of Farmer Needs and Priorities project that they are working on. We also invited Governor-elect Janet Mills to be here to provide an address, and she sends her regrets. She's not going to be able to join us because she's very busy at the moment, but she felt like this was a really worthwhile invitation and appreciated the chance to try to be here. We did take care in working with the Civic Center staff to try and source as many local ingredients as possible for our snacks and lunch today. So we've also asked that the producers be highlighted, or at least to make sure that the local ingredients are known. So please make note of that, and our deepest gratitude to all of the producers that really make it possible for us to gather. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that you will see a request to complete an evaluation hit your inboxes sometime tomorrow. Your feedback is really important to us. We're already excited about planning for next year, so we'd love to hear from you what you liked, what you didn't, what we might be able to do better. So thanks in advance for taking the time to do that. All right, I hope everybody has a great day, and I'm going to turn this over now to Jim, who's going to get us started with the storytelling session. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all for being here. And I just want to echo all of Erica's remarks. Thanks to the sponsors, the presenters, the farmers, service providers who've taken time out of their work lives to be here. And also, especially just to note how important this topic is at this juncture, not just for Maine agriculture in New England, but really for U.S. agriculture and beyond. This issue of access for a next generation of farmers and how the wisdom, the land, the assets is going to get transferred is so critical to the structure of agriculture. As noted in the agenda, there's going to be a lot of sessions today on technical issues and a range of other issues related to access and transfer. And I think the intention really here this morning was to ground this in the lived experiences of farmers, their personal stories, and the emotional and personal aspects of some of these abstract things we may be talking about. So we're really privileged to have a panel of 3 farmers to tell their stories and participate in this storytelling session. And all of them are coming at the issue of land transfer from a slightly different angle. And again, the goal is to really ground us in human experience for the issues of the day. The 3 farmers who are going to participate are BrennaMae Thomas of Patchwork Farm in Denmark, Stacy Brenner of Broadturn Farm, who's operating on leased land in Scarborough, And I think we're still expecting Carrie Whitcomb of Springdale Farm in Waldo, a multi-generational dairy farm. So I guess I'd invite, I know at least Stacy and BrennaMae are here to come on up and take a seat. I don't know if Carrie has arrived yet, but we'll take a look. Great. So I'm going to introduce each of them, give like a thumbnail of their story, and then we'll turn it over to each of them in turn to talk about their story for 10 or 12 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for question and answer, and maybe some other stories. So is it okay if you go first, BrennaMae? All right, put you on the spot. Hold on, I'll just introduce you briefly. BrennaMae Googins Thomas and her partner Brandon found a home for Patch Farm in Denmark in 2015. Patch Farm grows a wide variety of certified organic vegetables. And after stints working as farm apprentices on the West Coast and in New Zealand, they returned to the Northeast to settle and find a patch of land to call their own. They started down their path to ownership with a 4-year lease to own arrangement on their dream farm nearly 4 years ago, and I think they recently finalized the USDA Farm Service Agency loan to purchase the farm. So, BrennaMae.
I don't know how close I need to get to this thing. Hi, I'm BrennaMae Thomas Googins, and yeah, together my partner Brandon's floating around with our newborn son, Finian, and I think it's really interesting. We have a lot of people now who work for us, apprentices who come through, woofers who come by for short little stints on our farm. And then we also attend a lot of different farm training projects that MOFGA puts on and all these things for new beginning farmers. And Brandon and I are kind of somewhere in the middle. You know, we've been doing this for, farming for about 10 years. We've been doing Patch Farm for about 5. So we're still in this beginning farmer category, but we've kind of got a little bit of experience. And one of the things I feel like I hear a lot of people say are, how did it go for you? How did you find your land? You know, these kind of beginning farmers, people who are interested in making this their life's work say, I want to know what you did. Maybe I can hold on to a piece of that and that can work for me. Your story can work for me. And thinking back on it, that's kind of the mentality. Find out all of these little nuggets of information from all of these different farmers, and let's find the path that is going to work for us. And so when we moved back to Maine in 2012, we started working on different farms. We had a house in Parsonsfield, Maine, and eventually rented a 1-acre field at an apple orchard in 2013, kind of, let's just get this ball rolling. We don't have our land, we don't have our farm yet, but let's get this ball rolling and rent a little piece of land. So we started doing that, and then we started looking for farms, and I remember we had this little pink notebook, and we wrote year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, all the way to 10 years, and these were the things, this is the way we wanted our farm to grow. And in there, I don't know in there where it might have been to actually find a farm of our own. But we became pregnant with our first child, Ainsley, and I remember being at a farmer's market one day, and there it was. Brandon sent me a text message, and he said, I think this is going to be our farm. So I took a look at the listing at the Portland Farmers Market. I abandoned selling, I remember, and I was just like, this is way more important. I got to look at this. Somebody else can tend the booth. And that was our piece of land. But it was kind of terrifying. We had never looked at a farm before, and there was our farm. And so we subsequently then went to look at other farms afterwards to make sure that we had made kind of the feeling was correct. This was going to be our piece of land. It had woodlot, it had sloping land, it had flat land, it had animals and vegetables written all over it. It had a home for us. It had a home for my family. My mother came to live and farm with us. We knew that would be essential to live together but apart. And then we got the right feeling. That was it. These other farms weren't for us. This was going to be our property. And then you kind of start adulting, like, I'm going to have to talk to somebody. I'm going to have to talk to a bank. I'm going to have to talk to financiers. I'm going to have to figure this out, because there was no way, I guess we knew from the onset that a bank was going to be right for us. We had a little bit of family money saved up. We had savings, all these things, but, we hadn't really started our business yet. We didn't have any history. We knew a bank would just say no. And so we turned to the FSA and we sat and we said, all right, what do we need? And they said, well, you can either have a 3-year projection on your farm, what you think your sales are going to be for 3 years, or you can have a 3-year history. And I had gone to school at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington for like the business of agriculture. So I thought I could make a projection, I could do this, but that just seems really unrealistic to me. That doesn't seem right. So we decided, okay, we'll do a 3-year history. So now we need to secure this land, this farm, without buying it for 4 years. Because we know it's going to take some time once we have that 3-year history to put it together and actually go to the FSA and say, we did the work, we've got the data, we have what we need, now give us the money. And so that kind of became a big struggle with us. And luckily we met up with Joe Barrett from Land for Good, and we kind of said, what are some options? And there were a lot of options on the table. And one night Brandon was just kind of perusing the web, and he found a listing or a blog post from the University of Vermont about lease to own. And I remember sitting down with Joe, and she was like, gosh, I don't know anybody really I don't have any examples of a lease to own agreement. I don't really know of many people who have done that. Go for it. See what he says, and that's kind of feel like, all right, because this felt really, really right to us. We can get there. And this seems good. Now we need to convince this landlord that this is a good idea. And then we need to start getting lawyers involved and people to look at this big piece of paperwork, to say, who's going to pay for repairs on the farm until we own it? What can we do to the farm, until we own it? All these different intricate things that we needed to look at and to do. And we got through it. And we successfully made an agreement with the landlord that, half of our rent was going to go towards the down payment on the house. That's a pretty sweet deal. He was still going to take care of insurance and taxes. That was a pretty great deal. And we were just going to steward his land and take care of the farm and take care of the house and kind of make it work. And it did, and it has. And it's incredible to look back because, we did our history. We collected the data. That was so important. They always tell you, collect your data. Find out how much money you make per square foot on your carrots, But for us, it was find out how much money we need to make so that we can actually buy this farm that we've been pouring our blood, sweat, and tears into. And we did it, and then we spent a year, last season, I remember our apprentices sitting with us, like crunching data, just like entering all this stuff, totally geeking out on this FSA paperwork that was overwhelming and terrifying, and it's government paperwork. It's a lot of paperwork. But it was really cool to look at, and that seems so far away. And so in October of this year, we got it all done. And our son Finian had been born premature at 32 weeks. So we were 6 weeks into his hospital stay in the NICU. And finally the lawyer said, you guys have to do this. You actually have to come to the office together. You and Brandon, have to come together, which involved leaving our son at the hospital alone, which we hadn't done yet, and go to the lawyer's office and sign the paperwork so this is actually your farm. And it was really interesting because we were there and we brought our daughter Ainsley, and she's signing little Post-it notes in the lawyer's office, and we're actually signing the paperwork for this to be our farm. We got through all the paperwork, we got through talking to the lawyers, we're finalizing our story, and it didn't feel epic. It didn't feel like, oh my gosh, we made it, we're signing this paperwork, this is gonna be our farm, because it was already our home. It was done, and we had gotten through it, and we had made these decisions early on, and we had talked to all the people we needed to talk to. And it was just one more thing, And there was this other thing that was so much more important that was going on at the time. And I think, the part that felt the most about it being finally our farm and our home was coming back from the hospital with our son. And now we don't have to say, our landlord anymore, our absentee landlord from Connecticut, gentleman, farmer, whatever. And it's our place, and it's amazing. All the hoops that we jumped through, and now we have, our story, and we can tell people when they ask, well, what did you do? We can tell them, and we can help, give them some guidance, because everybody's got to make their own way to find their own farmland, and it feels good, and that's our story. So, thanks. Yeah.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to ask you a couple questions now, just to fill it out a little bit. What did you imagine the process was going to be like? Did you have any preconceived notions, and what surprised you? Or?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think because we did so much legwork in the beginning, because we sat down with Joe and talked about so many different options, because we went to FSA 4 years before we needed to go to the Farm Service Agency, and we talked to a lot of different farmers about what they did do. Brandon and I are all about educating ourselves as much as we can and talking to all the people who have done it before. And then we realized, okay, well, we can't follow the path that Stacy took, or we can't follow the path that any of these other farmers before us have done. We're going to have to go through and find our own path. And so it was just all about utilizing all of the resources. I remember the beginning Farmers Network, beginning Farmers Resource Network. Yeah, had maybe just started up around the time, or we just found out about it. And so I remember perusing all of those links and that website. And so it was just about, I don't think that we were able to have, any preconceived notions, other than we just need to get through it. I remember continuing to tell our FSA loan officer, no, we're just looking at the light at the end of the tunnel. He kept being like, I know this is a lot of work and it's really difficult. And we're like, no, we're going to be great. Like, we're going to be fine. And just remembering that at the end it would be over.
I'm curious about the beginning of the lease-to-own process. So can you say a little bit more, like, how did you even start the conversation with the landlord to raise the idea?
Yeah, we had a lot of phone calls. We actually saw the property. He didn't live on the property. His friends who were timber framers lived on the property, and they had fixed up the house, and they showed us the land, and they showed us the house. We didn't meet him until maybe 6 or so months into the process, probably about 6 months before we actually said to him, we do want to buy this land. Because it was a long, because like I said, in there we were looking at other farms, trying to decide if this was really the place we wanted to be. And I just remember one distinct phone call with him. We were sitting in our dining room, and I don't know, Ainsley was maybe taking a nap because she was only like 1 at the time, and so it was like, we have to make this phone call right now before she wakes up, it's important. And we just kind of said to him, this is what we want. We found this lease to own, because he did not want to do owner financing, because that was the first thing. I always forget this, that we approached him about, was doing owner financing. And he said, no, I absolutely don't want to do that. Let's find something else. And he has always been very absent. So he didn't want to do any legwork on figuring out how we could make this agreement work. And I think which was advantageous for us, because in the end, I think we actually had the sweeter end of the deal, in that so much of our rent was already going to pay off taxes and insurance and as a down payment on this farm that we were going to own. And so we approached him with that, and he pretty much said, yeah, okay, well, I'll have my lawyer draft something up. And so then I think that was kind of the 50-50, as we came up with the idea. His lawyer drafted the agreement. We showed it to Joe, and then we found a lawyer, and then we showed it to them. And when it was all said and done, there were still dates that were wrong in the agreement that we had to get amended, and all these kinds of things. But he was okay with all of that. He had a family And so I think he understood, and he had a business. He's a business owner as well. So I think he understood that part of things. Well, the farming aspect, he didn't know anything about. He knew, that we were lucky that he would be patient with us through some of the hiccups that were on our end and on his end. So that conversation went really, really well. I think because we went into it so prepared. We knew, what the lease to own agreement was. We went to him with terms, and he said, I'm actually very comfortable with all of those things. So I think having that knowledge and going into it with some sort of a confidence really, really helped.
Great, and it sounds like you did a lot of the work for him, so.
We did do a lot of the work for him, yeah. Which
And he
is,
didn't
again,
have
I
a
think
lot of
advantageous to
emotional
do.
attachments to the
Yes.
property
Yeah.
either
Yeah.
to break through, so.
Yeah.
What was the low point in the process for you?
FSA paperwork, absolutely, hands down. It's amazing to be able to, because the Farm Service Agency, there's so many amazing programs, but it is so intense to get through that, especially for buying, taking out, hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a farm there is a lot of history, and you have to crunch the data. And then when you realize that you've done it one way, and then you actually look at their paperwork, and you realize you have to do it a different way to get the numbers to look the way they want them, and then they go over it. Your loan officer goes over it, and then they say, well, we need to correct all these things. And then they say, oh, we're going to give you a new loan officer. And you're like, okay, great, now I'm going to have to learn a whole nother person, and he wants it to look a whole nother way. But you really, it's hard because you stay up a lot wondering whether or not you're doing your math right, whether or not you're getting it right. Because in the end, for the Farm Service Agency at least, you just need to show that you can make one more dollar than you need to spend towards living. So if you need to spend $100 living, that's all of your expenses, you need to make $101. And so it's all about that, being able to find the tipping point and making sure that you're taking everything into account the right way. And then you have to make sure that you're getting your depreciation, all the things that we should be doing, as good financial stewards of our businesses, but actually making sure that it's looking right. And that's really crazy when you're going in with a stack of paperwork because, and then you wait. And you wait because it's a government agency, which is wonderful, but there's a lot of things that take time. There's a lot of people who need to look at these things. There's a lot of people who are also going through this process, and there's only so many loan officers. So you have to know, you're going to submit your paperwork, and it's going to take a few months for it to actually kind of get rolling. And I think that's really terrifying, and it's really hard to know that you've spent 3 years collecting information, you've spent, 6 months putting it all together, then you have to redo it, and then get it in, and then you have to wait. And you have to wait for that yes. And that maybe that yes might not come. And I think that was the low part. And then you hear a yes, and you're like, ah.
One more question
Yeah.
right now. What, if you think about the people on the other side of the table, whether they were service providers helping you, or you said a lot already relative to FSA, but the landlord, the absentee landlord, what is some advice or insights you would provide to them that, now sitting on the other end of the process?
So advice for the landlord or the service
advice
providers?
for them, and I guess
Yeah.
in a way that would, facilitate this transfer process to you, right?
Yeah, straightforward communication is amazing. And and it sounds really simple, but it's really hard to do, both on the giving and the receiving end, is being able to explain our needs and our wants from both parties. Because if those things aren't on the table from the get-go, we start to imagine things or think that things are going to happen that aren't actually going to happen, or we wonder, and there's, confusion and stuff. And that was one thing that was really great. With Jo from Land for Good, she always got back to our emails and kind of said, like, you might, this might work, it might not work, and even though it's a kind of a broad statement, this could work, at least that was good to know. That like, there's a chance that this might not work, and that's okay, and then we can go back and we can revisit something else. With the FSA, it was, great, thank you so much for your paperwork, we'll talk to you in 2.5 months, but we knew what the waiting was gonna look like. Same thing with our landlord, when we approached him to be able to have those frank conversations. And then after we had those and we signed the agreement, we barely ever heard from him. We could hardly get him on text, and we could hardly get him on email, never got him on the phone, which at first was really annoying because it was hard because we didn't have this communication that we needed. And then eventually we realized that that was like his straightforward communication, that he just didn't, he was leaving it up to us, and he was okay with that. And, everybody else that we worked for, as long as we had good communication, because being left in the dark, like I said, with the low point question, I think is the hardest, can be the hardest part. And having some sort of framework, that communicative portion, knowing what's going on, I think was really good, and to know that we were supported by that. And yeah. Yep, for David, our landlord, that's his name, David, I haven't said it, just absentee landlord, saying, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. I remember there was one part of our agreement, the lease to own agreement, he did not want us to cut the wood in the forest portion of our land, because he had done it and had a management plan in place. And he said, as long as it's mine, I just don't want you to cut any wood from that land. And it was like, that is the one really important thing to him, was just don't cut the woods down. So then that was good to know, and we didn't do it yet. No, we won't be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I heard in your response, it sounds like, you had pretty realistic expectations, or people were communicating in a direct way that, no one was promising anything or setting your expectations at an unrealistically high level. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. There'll be time for more. Are there any burning questions right now for BrennaMae? We'll have plenty of time at the end. Yeah, please.
Just one quick question. I'm not sure if you covered it in the beginning of what you said, but what was your main venue for searching farms?
Did everyone hear that? She asked what the main venue or mechanism for doing her farm search was.
So I didn't do anything. My partner Brandon is a whiz at researching things. So I want to say he used FarmLink at one point, Craigslist at one point. I don't know. I keep looking at him. I don't know.
Is he here?
He's way in the back
okay.
there. He's
He's got a sleeping child.
Yeah,
don't
he's got
ask
a
him.
sleeping baby. And I really think he did peruse, Uncle Henry's a couple of times, anything that we could find that maybe would have farm information. But I think primarily Craigslist and FarmLink.
As lease to own or just to find?
Nope, just to find land. And the lease to own agreement was completely, I think, a random thing that we discovered late one night. Again, perusing the internet on every source he could find on different options for leasing land. And David, our landlord, he just wanted to sell. Like he had, this listing was up for 3 days, and then he took it down. And it was maybe the third time he had put the listing up. He had originally listed it with Sotheby's for like $600,000. It was crazy because he had these like ginormous, like, this is this place I've built, and all these things. And then he kind of realized that was not gonna work for him. And then like 3 years later, he listed it again for 3 days on Craigslist, and that's how we found it, because Brandon like continually, literally like every day would look, is that a new farm listing? Is this the one for us? Because we knew what we wanted in a farm, and this literally hit like 9 out of 10 of the markers, so. Yeah.
So this was a listing, a for sale listing?
Yep, a for sale listing, and we were like, we can't buy it, but what can we do? And he said, well, I won't owner finance, and I won't do all these other things, but I'll lease to own.
Okay,
So,
all right. Well, it's good to know that,
Yeah.
that this wasn't a lease listing, it wasn't a lease to own listing, but
Yeah.
you engaged with the owner and, came up with some solutions and found a path forward beyond what the original listing might have suggested, so.
Yeah.
Another quick question? Yeah.
Well, you see, the price, they started out at 5. Did you eventually, how did you negotiate a price that you could?
So I think it was like 2008 or something that he had listed it for the $600,000. So, and then he didn't list it again for a long time, and I think the listing was maybe 350 by the time he listed it for the third time. And we eventually got him down to 315. 315, yep. So part of that drop in price was him realizing that he was not going to sell it for that much money in Denmark, Maine. It's not.
Okay, a couple more, and then I'm going to turn it to Stacy, and then we'll have some time at the end as well. Go ahead.
Were there any conservation easements involved in the transaction?
Yeah, so we have 2 easements. There's an easement that goes up to a well that our farm has that easement on other people's property, just to an amazing gravity-fed well that was historically, this farm was a very large portion of Denmark originally. And then, it gets parceled off as time goes by, but that well is insanely amazing. And so our farm has an easement to that. And then we have CMP power lines. That was like the one downside to this farm is so they have an easement through our property, but there are no conservation easements. But we do have to deal with those 2 situations, I guess, from time to time, making sure, because we're certified organic, so we definitely have to stay on top of CMP to make sure that they're not doing things that they can't do to our land. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
that you've had?
Yeah.
And when do you have them? How do you get them? Pay them? How does it work? What do you get?
So
Yeah.
the question was about apprentices.
We have hosted apprentices. I guess this was our third or fourth season hosting them. And we've gone through MAFCA, the apprenticeship program that the Maine Federation of Farmers Markets has, which is fantastic. And I'm sorry, I just said I said the right acronym and the wrong actual Maine Federation of Farmers Markets. No, through Maine Organic Farmer and Gardeners Association. They have an apprenticeship program. And then we also participate in WOOFing, which stands for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And that's where people come from around the US or the world to stay for like 2 weeks to like the whole season. And they just work for room and board exchange. And we've had a lot of woofers turn into apprentices or go on to refer us as a place for their friends to come and apprentice at. And so that's kind of how we've put it out there, just word of mouth and then through the MAFCA apprenticeship program. They do farm labor on our farm, basically anything that needs to happen farming-wise, and they'll stay, for 4 months to, we've had one apprentice on our farm will be almost done with his second full year on our farm, so, and then he'll go fly off and do something else. So it's a wide variety of people and exchanges. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And there'll be more time at the end for more questions. Next, I want to introduce and invite Stacy Brenner to talk about her story of farm access and transfer. Stacy and her husband, John Bliss, own and operate Broadturn Farm on leased land in Scarborough, Maine. They have a unique tenure arrangement in that they've established a 30-year lease on a property that's owned by the Scarborough Land Trust. It's an experience they feel has given them some profound and unique insights into what makes a successful lease arrangement work for farmers and for landowners. Stacy has described the farm's tenure arrangement elsewhere as a grand experiment in farmland preservation and the development of a viable farm business. The farm also leases a portion of the land to the Snell family farm, and they're starting to think about how to transfer the secure tenure that they have now so that the farm and the farm business can continue. Stacy?
It's not too complicated. Okay. Hi. I grew up in suburban New Jersey, and my farming background started in high school when I learned about Helen and Scott Nearing. And it coincided with an obsession that I had with the Ingalls family from Little House on the Prairie, because I watched a lot of TV as a latchkey kid in New Jersey. But I think that created a a lot of resilience when you come home and you have to figure out how to make your own toaster oven pizza. So I feel like I have some grit from that latchkey kid experience. I went off to college and I studied agriculture at the University of Arizona. I specialized in plant sciences, and I worked on a lot of research studies that were funded by Monsanto in the 90s. And that was pretty fascinating for me, but it really did not translate into running a farm business. When I left Arizona, I went to the Pennsylvania, and I lived in Philadelphia and West Philly, kind of near where I grew up, and I studied to be a nurse midwife at Penn. And I met my husband, and at the time I was a single mom, and together we kind of threw our lot in and we moved to Maine, and it was the first year of the MOFGA Journey Person program. So we applied to the program, and you had to pay to participate. You had to pay to play. And they accepted us, and we embarked on a process of then finding a place to farm. And we landed on a farm in Cumberland called Sunrise Acres. It's since changed hands and has a different name, but the owner of the farm was looking for someone to run her vegetable CSA. We'd had gardens before, but we had never farmed, and she hired us. And so we sort of feel like that was a really big gift because it was sort of a trial by fire. We learned really, really fast. And we had some great mentors, Don and Bruce from Meadowood Farm, Don Beckwith. They were quite instrumental in helping us get going that first year. And the Portland Public Library also played a large part. I took out every book on how to farm. There was no like Google or YouTube or how-to videos at that point in time. This was 2000. And so we were there for 3 seasons, and we decided that we were ready for our own operation. So in 2003 or 4, I can't remember, Russell Libby mentioned to me that John Piatti had a property on the Farm Link in Cape Elizabeth, and we should look at it. And I should mention that we were limited into a 30-mile radius from Portland because I was working as a midwife at Mercy Hospital, and I needed to be able to get into town quickly for births. And so we went to look at this property in Cape Elizabeth, and it was so idyllic. It was right near the ocean. It had a little cape, and it had apple orchards and trees in the woods. It was 30 acres, and it had some open fields. So we negotiated a 5-year rolling lease that in year 3 we would be able to start to renegotiate with the family. And it was a father and a son that owned the property, and there was quite a bit of trauma that had occurred on the property between the two of them and the mother and the other son. And so after about a year, we realized that we were going to have to start to think up a new plan. We were there for 3 years. It took 2 years to find another opportunity. And we did bring in mediation at a certain point, and we started to tell the mediators our story, and they looked at each other at the end of us finishing the story, and they said, "We've never said this before, but we actually don't think that this is a mediatable," is that a word? This isn't a situation that is going to benefit from mediation. And it was the reasoning behind it was that the father and the son had a lot of mental illness, and they didn't feel like we were going to get to yes around a long-term lease arrangement that was going to allow us to really build an agricultural business. So we had a great run of it there, and what it taught us was how not to be romantically attached to the farmland and the house, and how to be able to live in a place, enjoy it, run a business, be successful, but also be able to say, I could move all this to the next piece of land, and it might take a hot minute to get it up and running, but there is capacity for that to happen. So we started looking around in year 2, and we had a long list of options, and we kept whittling them down. They included teaching at a place that was looking to have a farm component. It included Wolf's Neck Farm. And then Broadturn Farm was another option. At the time, it was called the Meserve Farm. The Scarborough Land Trust had bought it in 2004 and put an agricultural easement on it with help from Land for Maine's Future. I think Stephanie Gilbert was intrinsically involved in that process and went down to meet with the president of the Land Trust Board at the time and said, "These are soils of statewide importance. This has to be a farm." And the Land Trust president was insightful enough to say, "Yeah, let's do it." And they had no working farms in their land portfolio. They were really focused on hiking trails and birding spots for suburban residents in Scarborough. So they bought the property and they embarked in a process that they had no idea what it was going to mean to renovate a farmhouse that didn't have plumbing and heating, and turn it around and have it get a CO so that it could be rented to somebody or purchased by somebody. So we also found that property on FarmLink. So we've had 2 successful FarmLink experiences with Maine Farmland Trust, and we negotiated the exact same lease that we had with our first landlord. It was a 5-year rolling lease that in year 3 we would start to renegotiate. And that was an interesting process because the board, it was an all-volunteer board, so to get anybody to meet with us was a little bit like pulling teeth because they were all sort of, they wanted to show up for these, every other month meetings and, check in for civic engagement and then check out, and we were like coming to the table and this was gonna be our everything. So it took a little bit of time to get that initial lease written, and there was a board member who was a lawyer who was managing the process, and I finally showed up at his law office in Portland, much to his chagrin, because I needed to enroll our daughter into school, and I needed a lease in order to show the school that we lived in Scarborough, and I just forced the issue. And it wasn't like we hadn't agreed with, they'd had a board meeting, they'd agreed on the terms of the lease, we were all set. It was just getting everyone to show up at the table was really hard. And so we started off on that process. We had a couple hiccups along the way. We learned a lot about town code. There were restrictions about the kinds of housing you could put up for interns and apprentices and employees. There were restrictions there was a no piggeries ordinance in the town, which meant that you could have a pig, but if you had more than one pig, you had a piggery. So we had to go through a contract zone rezoning process for our farm, and that took a lot of cooperation with the Land Trust Board and was a very long process in order to get permission to have employee housing and to have pigs and to have a summer camp. And we, in year 2, we started to bring up the issue of the lease. And the interesting thing about a board is that there's only a handful of folks on the board. We've been there for 12 years. There's only a handful of folks on the board that are still on the board during those initial times when the ED has changed 3 times. And there's not a lot of emotional attachment to the property, but there's a lot of goodwill attachment. So very different than our first lease arrangement where the family was incredibly attached to the farm. The board is not emotionally attached to the farm, but they have a lot of goodwill, political capital built up in the property. So we brought in Land for Good. We brought in Equity Trust to help us think through some of the issues around how to write a different lease. We talked about purchasing the property. It was way out of our price range, even with the easement on it. It's a 434-acre farm, and we couldn't afford it at the time. And we couldn't imagine a process where we were going to be successful enough to ever afford it. But I think that was just our sort of beginner confidence, or lack of confidence. And so we met for 3 years negotiating our 30-year lease, and there was a point where we weren't sure it was going to come together. There were many points where we weren't sure it was going to come together, but eventually we came up with this agreement where it was a 30-year lease that would essentially be the life of our business. It was in our personal names, and it had all sorts of things attached to it that, we couldn't live there if we weren't actively producing an income from agriculture. We had to be on the property 6 months out of the year. So it was very much set up so that the leaseholder was the active farmer. And that's been really great, and it's given us a lot of freedom to grow and develop And we've come up with strategies with the board so that we have a committee that meets every other month. Part of our lease is a maintenance fund that we pay into, and then we host a fundraiser for the land trust annually that raises money for the maintenance fund, and that's how we care for the buildings that the land trust owns. There's a bunch of historic buildings on the property. But as our business has grown and been successful, we've had struggles around how to make big capital investments on the property that we could imagine building the equity in our business and that the return in that investment would be realized by the business. So we started looking at opening up the lease again and renegotiating it. So we're in the process right now of, and again, we went through all the incarnations of, do we buy it? Can it be a very, very stretched out buy, protect, sell project? Could it have an OPAV, the option to purchase at ag value, added to it as an additional easement to reduce the cost? Could we separate the buildings from the land? The answer to all of those things was no, either because it wasn't allowed by law, it was too challenging based on the administration in office, or the land trust wasn't interested. They don't want to sell the property. They really feel like it's their keystone, like the jewel in their crown. But they also recognize that that's partly because we've built a business there that the community likes to engage with. So we have built a very nice relationship of mutual trust. And the lease that we're working on right now will be a 99-year lease. The leaseholder won't be John and I, but it'll be Broadturn Farm Incorporated, so the business will be the leaseholder. Because what we realize is that we need to intrinsically tie the land and the lease together in perpetuity, because the value of the business is really about the value of access to this property. The sticking points for the lease are when we want to make an investment and build a new building. Do we need to get permission for the design of the building, the aesthetic of the building, the layout of the building, the exact location of the building? Obviously, it has to fall within the parameters of the conservation easement, but does the land trust need to give us permission for each and every detail? The other sticking point is who's responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the existing buildings? They would really like to get out from underneath having to get a phone call about a leaky roof, because they feel like it takes away from the work that they want to do, building trails and preserving open space. So they would like us to take on the responsibility of building maintenance and upkeep. So we have this fun negotiating point right now where we're saying, well, yeah, so we'll take care of the buildings, but then you have to let us build what we want when we want to build something new. So we're working with a fun process, I feel like, but when I went through it 12 years ago, I didn't have the confidence that I have now, and maybe that's just being closer to menopause, but I'm a lot more comfortable coming to the table and communicating exactly what I think the business needs. And I can separate emotionally what works for John and I as individuals and what works for Broadturn Farm as a business. And the business, I probably should tell you a little bit about the business. We farm about 12 acres in rotation between organic produce and cut flowers. We market our flowers sort of in a bunch of different platforms. We sell direct to retail to consumer as a value-added product, floral design. So we do weddings, special events. So we basically make like floral salsa. We put the flowers in a vase, we sell that to the customer. It's a value-added product. We sell raw product wholesale to other floral designers, to restaurants and caterers who would like floral product that they can use in their own designs. We sell wholesale bunched and designed work to places like Whole Foods and Rosemont Market and the Portland Food Co-op. And all our produce used to be marketed through a produce CSA. We got into farming because we wanted to feed people and we had this social justice mission. And then over time we realized that we really like small business and being entrepreneurs. And our farm crew wanted to work in the floral side of things. And so we've pulled away from the produce CSA and we've allowed the floral side of the business to grow because we have had employees that want that side of the business to grow. So our business growth has been directed by our employees' interests. because that's the way we've been able to retain skilled labor. We run a small summer camp, which we started actually in Cape Elizabeth, and we host events at the farm. So we host weddings and corporate parties and birthday parties, things like that. So we try to have different ways that the community can engage in the farm, because one of the principles of the project for us all together was, between the Land Trust and ourselves, was that there always needed to be potential for public engagement at the farm so that folks could experience agriculture in action at all times, authentic production scale agriculture. And that's about it. I think that's my story.
Sure.
Yeah,
You're
pause.
sticking to it.
I'm
for
sticking
now,
to
up
it.
to
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So, a couple of the same questions. Thinking back over, the whole trajectory, and you've had a couple different arrangements, and your business has developed a lot, and you moved. What were the real low points for you, and how did you push through them? If you can revisit, or you want to revisit those now.
There was a real low point when we were negotiating the 30-year lease with the Land Trust. There were a number of, I'm just going to be real frank here. There were a number of men, white, older men on the Land Trust board that we would meet with to discuss this lease, and they were very paternalistic. And they had a lot to say about, and a lot of questions to ask that I felt like were a little bit too personal, that were a little bit, they had a lot of incapacity to recognize that there were many right ways for a business to grow and for a farm to develop. And it triggered me. And so, if you say no, I'm going to push hard and push to yes. So that was a low point for me, is learning how to navigate the nuance of negotiating with folks that were like three fathers sitting across the table from me. And I was, for many women, me included, anger comes out as tears. So when I would get angry, I would cry in these meetings, and then I would get angry at myself for crying, because I'm like, oh God, how can I negotiate? I'm making them nervous because I'm crying, but I really am just angry and I want to yell, but I can't yell because that's not socially appropriate. So I think the low point was like sitting across the table from these three guys and really having a hard time learning how to navigate that.
Yeah, that's great. I want to push on that a little bit, just because you brought up both the gender dynamics, the age dynamics, and then obviously the other power dynamics related, because you weren't the land owner, something you want, and so the same dynamics would apply whether it's a next generation on a farm, within a family. So that's the low point. What advice do you have, about how to navigate that, both as a woman, as a sort of junior generation person relative to the people on the other side of the table?
I think practice. Every time you do it, you get better at it. So don't be afraid to show back up at the table. Don't be afraid to use your voice. Also be willing to listen to what they have to say, but be okay knowing that your experience, your plans, your wisdom provides you with a level of expertise in the room. And so I think practice helps. I think time, age, they all help the process. And our board has changed a lot. It's half women now, so it was all men, and now it's half women. So that's making the 99-year lease process actually far simpler.
I had a question. Like, you've been, here and other venues, you've talked about kind of, you're looking now to transfer the business and the land to the next owners and, or at least operators. And so I'm just curious if you just talk a little bit about the interplay between sort of your exit strategy, how you're thinking about that has evolved with the business development, where you've noted following the, developing the business in an area where there's interest among employees and allowing innovation to happen, and then negotiating this 99-year lease. Like how do those interplay?
So I think with the trajectory of any small business, the owners of the business become less involved in the day-to-day work. And if you really want growth to happen, you need to be able to step back and let other folks step in and be flexible and willing and welcome to let them try their techniques at weeding, for example, harvesting, packing, bunching, so that you can think bigger about the business. And you're the one that knows your business best. So you need time to be able to research things like, what does a 99-year lease look like? What are my options? What does it look like to become an employee-owned company? What does it look like to sell shares of the business or to give shares of the business? So those things take time and thought and networking. So as we've opened up our minds to being flexible about the way the business is run, we've been freed up to really think about it, and that's been fun. And we are really transparent with the Land Trust about our thoughts on business transition and how we're moving away from having interns. So for 17 years we had interns. This was the first season we did not. We have all salaried and hourly employees. But we really miss having people live at the farm because it's nice to build community on that piece of land. Our parents aren't coming to live with us, and our kids, it's up in the air. So, we feel like we can build a family farm and not be family and create legal structures around the business that allow for that to happen. So we're working on with the Land Trust in this 99-year lease process, conceptually to determine how we could build housing for partners in the business so that multiple people could be living on the farm at the same time that are involved in the business.
Mm-hmm. So the notion of sort of the housing piece of the property and its relationship to the business has kind of evolved, right? From your own residents to next generation or next iteration of owners and different types of employees or non-employees even.
And it's never, with fresh product, it's never going to be a money-making endeavor. You're going to make some money and you're going to have a nice quality of life, but you're not getting rich quick. So unless maybe we change our crop to marijuana, but there's some federal money involved in the easement, and we have those NRCS tunnels. So anyway, that's a side note. I've thought about it, as you can see.
Yeah, there you go. So you want to negotiate more, don't you, Stacy? Come on.
Yeah. So anyway, we're never going to get rich, but what we do have is access to this really amazing quality of life piece. The farm is beautiful. It's an amazing place to wake up every day. There's actually 2 of our former interns in the room, and so I'm speaking to them.
Right here down in the front.
Yeah. So so what we realize is that we're rich in land and we're rich in this resource of the farm, but we're never going to be rich in cash. But we're rich in access. So that's a way we can extend benefit to our employees is housing.
Great, thanks. Questions? There's one in the back, and then. Is there a mic or?
Where do you see yourselves in 10 years?
I don't see us going anywhere. I hope to be there for years to come. I see the business evolving and growing, and being a pretty vibrant, many-headed endeavor that's run by a bunch of like-minded people.
Yep, here.
I had a similar question, although I extended beyond the 10 years, and I wanted to also attach to my question. Are you emotionally attached to the property, and do you see yourself ever wanting to
Well, I was in Amsterdam last week, and I really could live there. I went to visit a friend who has that I went to university with who has cancer, and I'd never been there before, but it's pretty cool. So I could live there. But I don't see us going anywhere. I think we just have to come up with a model for how to stay there. And we have to come up with a way for, and I do feel attached to it. It's home. It's where my kids have grown up. We brought babies back to that house. We've buried dogs there. We've buried cows there. Lots of cats. So I do feel attached, but I see transition happening by bringing people into the business that want to be owners of the business, and that if the lease and the land are attached together and the business is already set up as a corporation, it's easy enough to do that. We've created a legal structure where we can do that.
No, yeah. Down here. Yep. Hustle over there.
I'm listening to a very different philosophy, yours personally, from what most people do in farming. I'm going at questions of both of these people here. As a person who owns the land, owns a farm, most farmers in the past figure that you go through this life, you have this lifestyle that you appreciate and all that kind of thing, and you work hard, don't make a tremendous amount of money doing all that stuff. The goal is, at the end, you have a big asset to sell. And that's an entirely different philosophy from the way you're going at this thing. I think more than anything else, I just want to point that out, that a lot of people who are in the process of trying to move a piece of land may be looking at it from a very different philosophy from yours.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I hear that a lot. And I think what would be really valuable is for farmers who own land, who've built successful farm businesses, to start to think about the legacy of their business and the work of the farming as the asset. Because what we need to do, I believe what we need to do as a region and as a farming community, is we need to not let our businesses go into disrepair as we age, and we need to be able to keep them at their peak of productivity, and we need to think of our work of farming as our legacy, and have our businesses be what is the profitable piece. So that's hard sometimes to swallow when you own the land, and that does feel like your largest asset. But if going forward, as we think about this next generation of farmers and folks accessing land, the business should be the asset, because that's what's going to move agriculture forward, is if we have really successful farm businesses that are valuable. It may not help you for this generational shift, but
You sure? Right here.
I just have a quick question. Have you continued to do the midwife work?
no.
Some of this?
No, I worked as a midwife for about 6 years, and when we moved to Scarborough from Cape Elizabeth, I left my practice and sold my part of the partnership with that business. And then I worked night shift as a nurse at Maine Med for a number of years, and then I left that too. So I've been home full time for about like a decade.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that supported everything for the early years. Mm-hmm.
So neither of you now are working off the farm?
No,
You were
I'm working off the farm today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Volunteering. Forget all the volunteer, right?
Yeah.
Way in the back, there was a question.
So, Stacy, am I correct in remembering that when you did an initial land search, it was with other folks, and maybe there was like a collaborative piece in there?
Yeah, so great question, two-part answer. One of the things that we were considering when we were leaving Cape Elizabeth was buying land with a group of people and creating like a co-housing community that would have a large open space that we would rent from the co-housing community to farm on. So that was one option we had. When we applied to the Land Trust, there was a call for proposals, and we submitted a business plan and a bunch of letters of support. We applied in tandem with John and Ramona Snell for them to use part of the property for their crop production for the Portland and Saco Farmers Market.
Other questions? other stories? Where? Oh, Tess, yep.
I guess either of you could answer this, but I am, just to kind of piggyback off of what you were talking about as the business being the largest asset in the end, as somebody who is currently looking to purchase a farm and that already has infrastructure, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about sort of how that might look working with people that the farm currently works with in sort of that transitional piece of relation building, as well as, you know, moving the farm in a direction, you know, or a vision that you might see once you've acquired it.
So how do you fit the existing farm structures into the business you want to build?
Yes, what your experience has been with that.
Yeah, so we acquired a number of buildings, a large dairy barn, it's called a threshing barn because the doors are not on the gable ends, and then a weird building with a cupola that's quite charming. But it took and they were all in pretty serious disrepair. They all needed new sills and new flooring systems and roofs. I mean, they were really rough. If we had bought that place, I don't know that we could have afforded to keep those buildings standing and have renovated them to the point where they would be usable for our business. What a crop or, you know, what production scale crop farm needs is like cement floors that you can hose down, not a bunch of wooden antique barns. I mean, they're pretty, but they're super inefficient for the kind of work that we needed to do. So it's been a really slow process, and it was quite inefficient for some time. But you know, we've developed in tandem with the land trust a place for processing our crops that works out quite well. But it was pretty it was pretty inefficient for a long time. And it was a very, very slow process. And it's just one project at a time we tackle. And, you know, we have a long tick list of things that need to be done. We did a full evaluation of all the buildings. We've done a full farm plan for what the buildings, their highest and best use for our business would be, and how we could make the most money out of utilizing them. And then what could we build or invest in that would be most efficient and effective for our crop business. So for example, the building with the cupola, its highest and best use is as our floral studio in 3 months out of the year. So we bring floral product in there and we turn it into design work. The long dairy barn, best use, storage. So, you know, it's a loft full of BrennaMae and Hort Nova netting and old tractors that we thought we would get running but haven't, and sometimes work and sometimes don't. And the threshing barn is where we host our summer camp. And so the highest and best use of that space was to let people enjoy being in it. But anything that's really functional for the business, we've built for the crop business.
And I think for us, that was one thing that when we started our farm search, that was part of like the criteria, is we knew what we needed, where our strengths lie. We knew that we could find a field that was tired and we could bring that back to life. But we knew that if we found a house that was tired, that we were gonna be in rough shape, because we are not, you know, builders. We're not, you know, we could probably make it work, but we knew that we would need, you know, a house that we didn't need to pour too much time and energy or money into, and that we wanted to have some structures but not a lot of structures, because we wanted to be able to build on the land how it would work for our business. And one of the things that we always said, we had worked at a few farms where it was like they got the animals before they had the structure for the animals. And so we said to a hard and fast rule we said is that we were going to have the building or the structure or the situation before we brought something to the farm, because it's amazing how easy it is to just bring the animals and say, I'll figure out housing later, or to buy the thing and then figure it out later. But that was a hard and fast rule. And so our property came with pretty minimal structure. It had been a family farm since the early 1800s, and it had actually been a MAFCA certified organic sheep operation and cut flowers back in the 80s, early 90s. And so there had been some different structures built that had kind of just like there was one little hut that still just is sitting in a very random place that is just kind of easy to ignore. But and And then because we had this CMP easement going through the property, we have some stuff that comes along with that where we can and can't build things in relation to the power lines that come through our property. And the farm that had been there before us had built a very expensive greenhouse right under the power lines, which was a huge financial downfall for them, kind of causing them to leave the property. And so, or one of the reasons that kind of caused that. So, you know, that was important to us, knowing how we could use things and, you know, just not having to worry about them too much, so. Yeah.
I have one quick question that came up, BrennaMae, for you. So maybe it's a little bit unfair with a newborn and just closing on a loan, but have you discussed, never mind, made lists about your plan for the transfer or exit from farming, as far off as that may seem right now?
Yeah, well, so we've always believed in the 3 generations on a farm really being functional and sustaining, which meant we needed to get a 3rd generation, which was the kids and then the parents, because we're the middle generation. You know, the older generation has the knowledge and the patience and a little bit more time. The middle generation has the gusto to get things done and, you know, like the physicality of it. And then you've got the younger generation that hopefully you can nurture to want to stay on the farm. And so that's kind of the stage that we're at is, I think it's kind of a parenting decision to allow them to be individuals, but also to hopefully provide them with the understanding that we love what we do and that we like doing it and that it isn't a struggle, that there are struggles that come along with it, but I think just that. So I think right now we have a lot of like, to our 4-year or almost 5-year-old daughter, Ainsley, we're like, oh yeah, and someday when you're a farmer, I mean, you can be whatever you want to be, but if you want to be a farmer, that'll be cool too, you know? So, and you know, we kind of have a long-term business plan of planting a lot of perennials that are going to take a very long time to come to maturity. Hopefully with the idea that we can set up some areas of our farm to be viable income in the future for hopefully our children, and if not, for somebody else who might want to take on the farm. Because when our farm wasn't a farm, I think that was a sad point for our town, and it's been really amazing now that we've turned it back into a farm. People will stop us and tell us how great that is to see it being a farm again. So I think we talk about just hoping that somebody will want to continue to steward it the way that we have. So that's pretty much where we've gotten. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for your questions. Thanks to both of you for taking a day to work off the farm for free with us. And everyone have a great day. Thanks.